So our second ancient Greek philosopher that you need to know for the exam is Aristotle. And the two main parts of the specification are the four causes and the prime mover. So first of all, let's think about how Aristotle differs to Plato. And this is really important because Aristotle and Plato have a huge impact on later philosophers. And you will find that philosophers will tend to be influenced either by Plato or Aristotle. Now, a key difference between Aristotle and Plato is that Aristotle is what we call in philosophy an empiricist. An empiricist is someone who believes that knowledge can be derived from the senses. Now, if we remember, Plato believed that because the world was constantly changing, it couldn't be trusted and so therefore couldn't be the source of true knowledge. And this leads Plato to reject this physical world and instead see the source of true knowledge as being the realm of the forms. So if we think back to that Heraclitus quote that we reviewed back on Plato's presentation. Now, Heraclitus noticed that everything was changing, and we saw that Plato sees this as a reason to reject the physical world, whereas Aristotle is saying, hang on a minute, let's actually investigate why is the world changing. So instead of rejecting it, he's going to, like modern day scientists do, is to investigate it. Now, key concept to Aristotle is this term change, and by change he means movement. And what he means is movement in terms of potentiality to actuality. So we take the example at the bottom. So you've got a hot cup of tea or coffee at the bottom. And what you see is that over time, thinking about the environment, say it's a cold day, that cup of coffee is going to get cold. And so what we have is we have a movement, it's actually hot, but while it's actually hot, it has the potential to become cold. Now over time it's going to change and it's going to move to being a cold cup of coffee. And so now it's gone from being actually hot with the potential to be cold to now being actually cold but still has the potential to be hot. If I put that in the microwave like I often have to do at school, it then is so actually cold. Now it's going to become hot again because I'm going to bung it in the microwave, and now the thing which was potentially hot again is now becoming actually hot, and so on. So this is what Aristotle means by motion. He means the movement from potentiality to actuality, and he observes this and he says that everything is constantly going back and forth between these different ideas of potentiality to actuality. So to understand how things change, he thinks, right, so now I've observed that everything's changing, now there actually must be reasons why are these things changing. And he talks about this in terms of four causes. We've got the material, formal, efficient and final, and it comes from the Greek word aion, which means cause. So the four causes, always use an example. Aristotle himself actually uses a statue, but a common example that people might use is a wooden chair. So in each of the causes, I always find it helpful if I was writing about them, is to define what the cause is, say what question it answers, because a way of thinking about is like, why is this thing here? What makes it different to something else? What is it made of? How did it get here? And those kind of questions we might ask when investigating them, things in this world, actually then match the four causes. So the first is material, so that's just a physical substance. So for example, with a wooden chair, that would be the wood, or the marble statue. Formal, so this is where he's really different to Plato, and this is kind of where you can really show that sophisticated understanding in an essay, where you can really point out that for Plato, form is something which is not physical. It's something which is transcendent to the things we see in the physical world. They are the forms of the realm of the forms. Whereas for Aristotle, he's saying that forms are within the things. They are the characteristics of the things that we observe. They're not transcendent and separate from them. And these are your characteristics. What makes a chair different to a marble statue is that a chair needs a seat and 4 legs. Statues don't have that unless it was a statue of a chair. Then the efficient cause, this is the one that is probably not well defined by most candidates. This is the activity or the agent, and an agent is something which acts on something else to change it. So for example, with our chair, the agent was the carpenter. That's the person who took it from being a lump of wood to then being a chair. It's the activity, it's the thing which brings it about. And then your final cause is the purpose or goal of the object. Why is it here? What purpose does it have? What's the end of it? And this, for Aristotle, was the most important cause for him. Now, he observes all of these things. He observes that everything is in motion. These things are brought about by the 4 causes. But he also starts to think about, why is this whole eternal movement happening in the first place? What is causing it? Why is it here? And so he therefore kind of needs a final cause for the entire universe. And what he starts to talk about is the idea of a God. But by God, he doesn't mean the Christian idea of God. He doesn't mean something that's transcendent and personal and cares. Is not a creator. And instead, and that's why I tend to use the term prime mover rather than God, is because actually I think it's useful to remember this is not a Christian or Judeo or Islamic idea of God. It's a very different, it's a philosophical idea. It's an explanation as to why there is motion and movement in the world. So Aristotle's sort of astronomy looked a bit like this, so a bit different to how we kind of view the world. Now he believed that the prime mover is, and this is why I kind of like this picture here. Now the prime mover is not aware of us. It is thinking only of itself, because if it was aware of us, it would change. And as I said, this is an explanation as to why there is movement in the world. Now, a really useful analogy to consider. Now the magnet's not aware of these nails. It's not saying, oh, come closer to me. It's not wanting to attract them. Because of its very nature as a magnet, it is attracting those iron nails, but it's unaware of it. And this is the way to think about the prime mover. So the prime mover, as I said, is an explanation as to why. So this is really similar to Aquinas' first way, the unmoved mover. And Aquinas has used Aristotle's idea here. So he's saying everything is in motion, but whatever is moved by itself must be moved by something else. And so what he means by this is that whatever is moved is potentially something, but it has to be moved by something which is actually what it has the potential to be. So if we take the idea of a lump of coal, it has the potential to be hot, but it can only be moved by something which is actually hot, so like a fire. So if we get this idea that everything is moved by something else and it's external to it, then we're going to end up with this infinite chain of motion. And Aristotle says that wouldn't really be an explanation as to how this infinite chain of motion came about, what causes this motion. And he therefore argues that there must be an external agent, something which is pure actuality that causes this motion. But this thing must be unmoved itself, because if it was moved, it means that it would be changed by something else, and then this infinite chain will keep on going. So for him, the prime mover is not something that he's trying to prove because he wants there to be God. It is almost like an answer to the question, why is the universe here? Why is there eternal movement? Well, his answer is, that's because there is an unmoved mover who is causing the motion in other things. And so the characteristics of Aristotle's prime mover or God is that it, like the world, is eternal. And because it is perfect, it has to be perfect, remember, because if it wasn't perfect, it would lack something and so therefore would change, and it can't change because then it wouldn't be the ultimate explanation of movement. So therefore it can only be aware of itself, and that's fine if it's aware of itself and it doesn't change, therefore its knowledge doesn't change. He then talks about it being pure thought, and Aristotle puts a lot of emphasis on intellectual power being the most important thing. And so he has this phrase, it's thinking about thinking. It's immaterial because if it was material it would change, and it can't change. And it's unaware of the earth and everything, because if it was aware of us because we change, it would change. And so therefore it's only aware of itself. Now, I really want to highlight the domino analogy with the idea of this unmoved mover argument, like with Aquinas, is wrong. At GCSE, you might have got away with it, but not at A level. And the reason why is because with the domino analogy, you have a chain of dominoes. Now, all you need is the idea of a first cause, and that's kind of what the domino analogy suggests, that there is a first cause. But a first cause just starts something off. It's like clicking my fingers and then it all begins. However, he's not suggesting this. He's talking about something that keeps it in eternal movement, eternal change. It keeps things moving, not as in a first cause that could have started it and kind of left it going. It's something that's keeping everything in motion. And that's a really nice way to finish an essay. If I had an essay and the student really showed right at the end that they understood why the domino analogy was wrong, then I could really tell that that person understood what Aristotle was arguing for. But you can use it for Aquinas as well. Now, Aristotle. First of all, let's look through the criticisms. So this is where we're going to be talking about in part B's why Aristotle may not work. So one of the big main branches of objections to Aristotle is the idea that he assumes that everything is teleological, i.e. that everything has a goal or a purpose. Now, the question to raise in a part B is he right to think that everything has a purpose? Now, you're going to recognise this idea of fallacy of composition. We've met this before. And this is the idea that just because everything within the universe or within us, or, the chair has a purpose, a bee has a purpose, for example, doesn't mean then the universe as a whole has a purpose or final cause. So do we have to have final cause of the universe, i.e. the prime mover, just because everything within it has a final cause? And actually, is there a purpose of everything? For example, you might raise a mosquito. What is the purpose of a mosquito? Is it just to be a mosquito? Is there anything else we can think of? Maybe not. And if there isn't a purpose for everything within the universe, then these four causes don't work. And actually, I think this would be a very sort of Hume criticism, that maybe it's just a habit of our thought. We like the idea that there are purposes, and we kind of just assume, well, therefore, of course, there must be a purpose, because we like the idea that there is an answer to why is it here. As Russell would say, Bertrand Russell, maybe the universe just is. Maybe it's just a brute fact. And actually, why does there have to be a final cause of the endless chain? Maybe it just is, as Russell would say. And the reason why we can't imagine it is just a limit of our mind. Just because we can't think it doesn't mean there is. And the whole idea of the prime mover is really odd. And the way you would talk about that is to pick up the idea, how can something which is immaterial think? Doesn't it have to, have a mind? Is that not something physical? How can it be thinking about thinking? And how does it attract things out of love, which is kind of what Aristotle says, that things are moved and move because they're sort of attracted by the pure actuality of the prime mover. And finally, scientifically, his view of the universe has been proven wrong. So a few slides ago I showed you how he viewed the universe and the galaxy and our solar system, and that's been proved wrong. So if that's been proven wrong, then we might think his whole idea about the prime mover would be wrong as well. However, in a part B, I think it's really important to be prepared with some strengths. And I think if I ever had a part B about Plato or Aristotle, I would be arguing that even though Aristotle might not be perfect, that his approaches may be better than Plato's. So Aristotle's empiricist approach fits more with modern scientific ideas. He allows us to investigate the world, and we can think about the four causes sort of as working out in our world. If we look at something, we can think of the material, the formal, the efficient, and the final causes. And finally, I think as well that, at least with Aristotle, he understands that knowledge is gained, and it's gained through experience, which most people would agree with, and modern scientific ideas would agree with as well. Whereas Plato believed that everything was recollection. You're never really learning anything completely brand new. And I would argue that most people would say that you are born what John Locke would say as a blank slate, that what you do is you gain new knowledge. Evolutionists may say that we have some instinctive knowledge that we acquire, but Plato believed that everything was recollected from previous knowledge, and many people would feel that this was too far. Now finally, although this is not on your specification, I do think it's something that can put you separate from the thousands of Aristotle essays that the examiners are going to read. And that's that Aristotle observes not only that the world is changing, but actually there's three broad groups of substances. And the first group of substances are those which change, those which are moving, but will ultimately decay and die. And those are things like us, plants, animals, lots of different things. Now the second type of substances are things which change but don't decay. So he said, for example, the earth and time. Now this is quite interesting because obviously we now know that scientists believe that ultimately the earth will die at some point, but we've got to think about Aristotle's writing a few thousand years ago. They didn't have that understanding. And then finally, the third type of substance are those which don't change and those that don't die. So things like, for example, numbers. Numbers don't change, they're not going to die, they are separate from that idea. Now, the reason why this is relevant to potentially an exam question is that what you can recognise is that substances 1 and substances 2 are caused to change by the four causes. And so this is kind of a nice final paragraph where you can just show the examiner that you have a bit more knowledge. Okay, so that's the end of our Aristotle presentation. Remember, if you have any queries, please come see me in the lunchtime drop-in sessions.